Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good following morning. It is AMA number 61. Good morning, good Today afternoon, is, good evening. Feedback. That's bad. Today is May 19th.
20th.
Today is May 20th. Thank you. There we go. Right on cue. Today, a special guest is Herbert Block. Herb is the CEO of the American Zionist Movement, the AZM, which is the umbrella organization of Zionist movement in the US. He's a fantastic guy. But before we get to Herb, joining me today, not a special guest, a special co-host. We've never had a co-host before. Rabbi Avi Baumel, who is back in Krakow after 14 months. We've missed you, Avi. Back in the crack. How is it? Just got back yesterday. How is it to be back?
It's strange. I'll tell you the truth. I mean, it's wonderful to be able to be back at the JCC and to see what's going on here. But it's weird to be back in Krakow. It's like a year and a half of my life just disappeared. And now just picking it up where we left off. At least the weather's good and the people are nice that they are happy to see me. But walking through the streets and, it's not tourism, so it's just Krakow. It's a very eerie feeling, but I'm happy to be here and hopefully we move forward from here.
It was a lot more eerie or eerier a few weeks ago. This is like already things are open, restaurants are open outside now, people are out. This is like 90% more than there was. Let me just check in. Hello, Kasha Leonardi. Sita, my dad is watching. Look, Dad, I'm with a rabbi. I'm not a rabbi, but I'm with a rabbi who will bless me during the show. Rabbi Avi is here. Hi, Sita. Hi, Dad. Saul, yeah, welcome back. Saul says, welcome back, Rabbi Avi. Jeffrey Rolat, good morning, Avi from LA. And hello, Jonathan. Hello, everybody. Very good to be here with Avi. So, Avi, Israel, when you were flying, I wasn't sure if it was even going to be possible. What is it? Is the airport, as we go through this rockets flying and the airport was closed for a short period of time, was it normal flying at this point? I mean, normal Corona. I don't mean normal. Is the airport, what's the airport situation?
So it was quiet and half of the flights were canceled. And I kept checking a week before, is Lot going to cancel? There's still missiles flying around, but you know what? They kept true to themselves and they took me in the air. The flight was full and the process was not difficult. I actually went a few weeks ago to Florida. So the process is pretty straightforward. Everyone who leaves the country has to take a corona test, a PCR test, and you have to show it in order to get into the airport, regardless of whether you're vaccinated, which most of the country is. They take double measures. So I took a PCR test and then I went to the airport. It was a painless entrance. Some of the stores were open and duty free. Most of them were not. Got on my plane and a few hours later I was in Poland and it seems to be opening up. Now I know that in other places there are cancellations. It was interesting that the plane took off and flew east, so as if to go towards Jerusalem, right away from the missiles. And then once we got high enough, we turned around and we went north. And so I guess they're making sure.
I get not many people would. You've flown to Poland so many times that. I guess Israel's a small country, and if you fly out of Israel enough, you understand the planes always go a certain way. But yeah, it's interesting to notice that they went east as opposed, because usually they just go right over the water.
I didn't see the water for a while. I was watching it very, very carefully, because listen, what are Israelis doing? They're looking up, and they're nervously watching to see if they see missiles, if they hear sirens, and the day before there were 100 missiles on the coast, so it's frightening there.
And what about you live in Efrat, but also Caesarea, where your in-laws are, so you split your time there. What was it like in Efrat, and what about Caesarea? Did missiles? Because I know missiles were shot at Jerusalem, but what about farther? So Tel Aviv, Caesarea, for those who don't know, is north of Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem is, of course, east of Tel Aviv. So what about or Efrat is even a little bit east of Jerusalem, I guess, or south of Jerusalem?
Southwest.
Or southwest of Jerusalem. One of I was running
Both
out.
Efrat and Caesarea were in the no missile zone, more or less. It's just out of the range. Now, it's not really out of the range, but in Gaza, they don't have the precision to shoot missiles at Efrat, which is surrounded by Arab settlements, and in Jerusalem as well. What if they hit the dome with a rock? So they're staying away from that. In an ironic twist, Efrat, which is part of Somet Gush Etzion, which is all other times one of the most dangerous places in Israel. Unfortunately, there have been murders there, and there have been drive-by shootings, and there have been stabbings, and it's a hot zone. But during this time with the missiles, we were just trying to connect with our brothers and sisters throughout the rest of the country.
Yeah, it can't be. You can't have all the danger in one place. Tel Aviv, generally Tel Aviv avoids the brunt of things for a while. So we have that. So it's interesting. It almost seems the timing of things. It almost seems like right as the country was emerging from Corona, there was like a 5-day period in Israel, which was almost normal, and then you have everything that started to happen, and missiles and the rest of it.
I would say even more. I'd say for a short period of time, there was a feeling that maybe we're getting closer to something that can bind a large majority of the country together in politics. If maybe it's going to be the post-Bibi era, maybe there's not going to be a lock on different types of politics. But in an unreal situation, Naftali Bennett, who is more right-wing than Bibi, was willing to join together with Likud, a splinter of Likud, mainstream, as well as Yair Lapid, more left-wing, as well as Labor, more left-wing, as well as Arabs, most left, in some kind of rainbow of unity. And maybe you'll say cynically that the unity was against Bibi, but one way or another, they were leaning towards creating something that Israel hadn't seen, I think, in its history. And then it all blew up. Now, was that the cause, or was there other issues, or is it politics? Is it Hamas? Is it Bibi? I can't say, but it's a shame we went from euphoria to war, or near euphoria, in a short time.
And we're going to talk a lot about Israeli politics and Zionism in the U.S. with Herb in a few minutes. I want to maybe go back a little bit and talk about Corona in Israel. How do you feel as an Israeli citizen who's living in Israel, not like me, a citizen sitting in Krakow, but how do you think the government handled the crisis? I know that there are different elements. In other words, getting the doses, making a deal with Pfizer and getting the country vaccinated, obviously good, but there were other elements in terms of what was closed, what wasn't closed. How do you see the government response overall in Israel?
Listen, in terms of getting getting Pfizer, getting the vaccination better than any other country in the world, it's impossible not to acknowledge the magic done by Bibi, and nevertheless, more than half of the country is against him. So that's remarkable. But it's impossible not to acknowledge that was a success, a rousing success. I mean, we're 3/4 of the country is vaccinated, and the whole country feels like we're out of it, and in a pretty, not a harmless, but in a pretty good way. Having said that, I'm not a business owner, so I sympathize with them, but I don't really know the experience that a lot of the politicians were saying, who were trying to get rid of Bibi, saying it was too harsh, it was too draconian, the measures, and how many times were we locked in? 4 times, 5 times. And it really hurt the economy and hurt the country. Now, you always play Monday morning quarterback. So, you say, well, it was too hard. And of course, they opened up more, and they ended up like other European countries where there are thousands of people who died. So then we were said the other way. In general, I think we weathered the storm well, and the government worked on it really hard. And for those of us who were able to be with family, it was, some of us were in Caesarea with family. It was not a bad way to spend Corona.
And what
And
about what about the? So I hear what you're saying, and that's how I would say that would be my take on it from the outside. Generally, in certain ways, you have to acknowledge all the positive, and it's easy to second guess certain other things. But what about the issue? And this is something that is always, these days, that and another main wedge in Israel, which is that the rules are different for the ultra Orthodox, for the Haredi. And when you have crises and things like this, when you see schools that stay open or rules that are just flagrantly being violated, it sort of sows issues between not about the secular and the religious, but more about the ultra Orthodox and kind of everyone else. Did you get much of a feeling of that? Because that's how it played out a little bit in the international Jewish media, let's say.
I would say that, first of all, the lines have been drawn for a long time, and those who are not Haredi know that the Haredi live in a different world and have their own system, and we're not really going to start pointing fingers every single time. Otherwise,
except that in a public health, but for an educational system, it's one thing. But in a clear-cut situation of a public health, because you have this in the U.S. as well, in a public health situation, those people who don't get vaccinated or who are infecting because they're close to one another and not obeying mask and distancing regulations are also getting on the tram and the bus and walking down the street and going into a shop and have an effect on others.
There's no question that the Haredi leadership dropped the ball for a long time and ignored it, and there was a lot of animus towards the Haredim for not taking it seriously. And the government might have had kid gloves and not come down on them too hard. At the same time, during this whole time, there were always protests in the thousands. And when you go to a protest, it was apparently legal to not worry about social distancing. So people kind of saw both sides. If ever I was in a lockdown and I needed to get back to Jerusalem, I would just say, I'm going to protest Bibi. and somehow magically that was okay. It's complicated. The Arab sector and the Haredi sector.
I was going to say, if you want to go to the movies in New York or in Krakow, you don't have a ticket. You say, "Oh, I'm not going into the cinema. I'm just going to protest Bibi." I think they let you in straight away.
I think that in an uncomfortable symmetry or parallel world, and the Haredim hate this, but there is a certain comparison between the Arab sector and the Haredi sector. Both of them, the government kind of stays away from and doesn't want to press too hard, and they kind of have their own little worlds and violate some of the laws. And we obviously need to crack down on both of them so that everyone can feel like everyone has civic responsibility.
I just wanted one last question about just kind of coming back to where we are now with the stuff that's going on, all the fighting. I think the most upsetting thing, rockets from Hamas. Yeah, we know Hamas is the enemy, but seeing the stuff going on in Lod and mixed cities in Israel, Akko, Jaffa a little bit, Haifa, I think has been really, really upsetting. You have essentially lynch mobs on both sides just running around, Arabs looking for Jews and Jews looking for Arabs. And it's hard to, how do you, Hamas is the enemy already, but when you're talking about Israeli citizens and Israeli citizens, how do we come out of that? In other words, do things go back to normal in Lod after this?
So my daughter's close friend moved to Lod, and my kind of like adopted son who was a Chayal Boded. When he went to college, he moved to Lod. There was this thing that young people are moving to Lod in order to make sure that the presence of Jewish life in Lod is balanced with the Arabs that are moving in. And this is just one example, and there are other cities like this as well. I asked them years ago, like, how do you do this? Like, it's crazy. There's a whole kind of chamula of Arabs just a few blocks away from you. And their response was, They do their thing, we do our thing. It's quiet. There's a lot of, she said, there's a lot of violence in their side. They're shooting each other. There's violence happening there. We're just living our lives and doing our thing, and it's quiet. And then all of a sudden this explodes and it breaks your heart. And when they start looking for Jews, and apparently the police weren't exactly as responsive as they should have been. And there was great tragedy. And you're right.
Well, both sides, not only looking for Jews, to be honest, they're talking about, I'm not going to pay so much attention to the front page New York Times article about WhatsApp groups saying death to Arabs, that they're, using WhatsApp to go and find Arabs to beat up. But it was on both sides.
I hate any time you say the word both. I reject it completely and entirely. There are never any Jews that are randomly, for no reason, deciding to go and you do vigilante.
Wait a second, Avi, and I have to say, and it's not, talking about what side, I'm not, I couldn't be more against Hamas and on Israel's side here. But if there are Jews, the facts are that there are Jews and people on both sides that are, in terms of the civil violence going on in Israel. You reject that?
I reject that. I reject that statement. The facts are that Arab instigators went out and started killing and murdering and destroying and doing terrible things. And then in response, in reaction, Jews went and said, you know what, we're going to get revenge on you. That's how I see this situation. Those are the facts.
But you must that's not okay.
Careful to nuance that fact.
All right.
Not to say, well, there are some gangs that are Jews that are killing random Arabs and some Arabs that are killing random Jews. That's not what happens, and it's not what happens in the entire country. There are Jews trying to live in peace. All Jews in Israel trying to live in peace. Arabs who are some trying to live in peace, and some complete terror maniacs that cause a major ruckus, which cause us Jews to have to react in negative ways.
I'm not sure about all Jews in Israel trying to live in peace, but okay,
let's bring on. All Jews in Israel are trying to live in peace.
That's a statement that is a complicated statement to believe. But let's bring on our guest, who's a good friend who I've known for years and years. Herb Block is for the last 4 years has been the executive director of the American Zionist Movement. He has had a long career in Jewish communal life and public service. I met him when he was assistant executive vice president of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. For 15 years, he was responsible for the government affairs and property restitution portfolios. He was a member of the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad, appointed 3 times by President Obama. He had a career in New York City government. He worked for Mayor Dinkins, a special assistant to the mayor. And then before that, when Mayor Dinkins was the borough president, he sits on a lot of boards. He is really an insider in the Jewish world. It is my great pleasure to stop fighting with Rabbi Avi and bring on our good friend, Herbert Block. How are you, Herb?
How are you, Jonathan? And hello, Avi. Nice to see you both.
Good to see you. Good to see
you.
Would
be better to be together in person, and hopefully we will again soon. But this is a good way of communicating and talking. Thank you for inviting me to be with your audience today.
It's our pleasure, and it was good timing because Rabbi Avi and I, after 24 hours of getting along very well, have reverted back to form. And we're starting to get into it. So it's good. It's good. Blessed is the peacemaker. So thank you, Herb. Herb, I wanted to start I want to talk a little bit about your career in the Jewish world, and definitely a lot about what you're doing now with the AZM, with the American Zionist Movement. But before that, your father is a rabbi, and also Avi, who's 26 generations or something rabbi. How much pressure on you was there as a kid to become a rabbi? Did you think about becoming a rabbi? What was that process like?
So I grew up as what they call a PK, a preacher's kid. Is a well-known term in America. My father, I'll mention his name, Harav Yisrael Ben Pesach, Rabbi Irving J. Block, was rabbi, was the founder and spiritual leader for 40 years, from 1954 to 1994, of the Brotherhood Synagogue, a congregation in Manhattan that he started. It was one time part of the conservative movement, but for most of its history, and today it's an independent congregation. And he founded it on with really the name Brotherhood, and the Hebrew name of the synagogue Kehillat Kadosha Beit Achim, to bring together across denominations Jews of different backgrounds and not have sort of a label on the synagogue, as well as an open pulpit, open door policy, no cost for tickets on the holidays. Members got priority seating, but there were 1,000 people would come on the Chagim for open services that were held separately, which even to this day I hear of people who wouldn't have gone to a synagogue where they were charged tickets and came to his synagogue. And he pioneered in the field of ecumenical work with many Christian communities and faith leaders, and pioneering in outreach to the Black Jewish community, both in America and even in the 50s and 60s with the Jewish community in Ethiopia. So just a little bit about my father, and thank you for mentioning him. So I'm proud to be a rabbi's son. I was always interested in sort of public service and community service, which is part of what a rabbi does. And I, went to day school my whole life, but never decided to become a rabbi, but decided to engage in public and communal service in a different way, both in the first part of my career in New York City and Washington in government and politics, and for the last 20 some odd years working in the Jewish community. So I consider myself to keep up my father's tradition of public and community service, and do it in a different way.
And just about your father's really a legendary figure, and certainly I remember when I've been to Brotherhood Synagogue many times, and always heard them speaking about your father in this legendary way. But it's also a very beautiful, interesting synagogue. First of all, because it's in Gramercy Park, which is its own sort of secret world that's hidden really to many New Yorkers, because you need the key for the park and all that. It's overlooking the park. And also because it was a Quaker meeting house, which is, I think, the building itself is 150 years old, or so, the middle of the 19th century. Beautiful as a synagogue. It's very unusual. It's certainly not your typical synagogue building.
So I'll let me tie a couple of things together. One, my father started the Brotherhood Synagogue in '54, and they shared a building with a church. And they had this agreement of when the things that were covered in the sanctuary and the services on different days, and had a fantastic relationship with a Presbyterian minister, Dr. Stitt. They traveled the world together. They visited Germany in the 60s. They did a lot of ecumenical work together. He retired, and then in the early 70s, a new pastor came in, who the Presbyterian Church, I guess, sent in, but besides being a church wrecker, having done that in previous congregations, he was an anti-Semite. And during the Yom Kippur War, he put up a bulletin board in support of the Arabs for victory over Israel. And at that moment, things had already been declining. My father said the synagogue is moving out, and they marched out with no home to go. They were basically a homeless congregation for a year. They davened with Orthodox shuls, conservative reform, all over the place, until they found this building that was a Quaker meeting house that had been vacated, which was perfect for a shul because it had the Quaker meeting houses have no sort of denominational objects on the wall. It didn't need a lot of repair for it to begin to be used as a synagogue building. And it had been a stop on the Underground Railroad, harboring freed slaves. So it was a historic building that sort of fit in perfectly with what my father was doing, and it began a new life for the synagogue, which has grown and flourished in Gramercy Park, on the park, an area that, in the early 100 years ago, Jews weren't so welcome there, in Gramercy Park. So it was, quite a change, both in the neighborhood, and things have evolved. But it's a historic building that's taken on a new life now for the last since the
since the 1975 as a flourishing synagogue downtown.
Yeah, and a beautiful, really just a wonderful space, very welcoming. I just, my experience, I once went there when we were opening our preschool to meet with the preschool director there, and I'm speaking to her and she goes, "Oh, you're Poland? Oh, actually, I know Poland pretty well. My brother used to work in Poland." And I go, "Oh,
Lee
your brother,
Feinstein.
what did he do?" And she goes, "Oh, my brother was the US ambassador to Poland. There was Lee Feinstein's sister is running the preschool."
That's how I bonded with Lee Feinstein the first time I met him. The US ambassador to Poland under President Obama, his sister ran the nursery school. So the first time I met him, he said, "I know all about your connection." So it's a small Jewish world.
So from you, I think you've had all these difficult, sort of Israel and Zionism and New York City politics, and then sort of international. The middle, which is what I want to talk about now, is sort of your career in terms of your work at JDC, which is of course an institution, one of the founders of our center here. Really, the overseas, in many ways, the overseas arm of American Jewish philanthropy around the world. It's a 105-year-old, 110 almost year old organization. Can you maybe talk a little bit about your work there, dealing and especially how it relates to Poland? Do you remember your first visit to Poland? How did you? Because I would call you an expert these days on Poland. How did that happen?
So I stopped counting at some point, but my first of about 50 trips to Poland was in August or September of 1999 when I was working at JDC, and we were helping to arrange the Jewish community property restitution with the Jewish community of Warsaw, the Jewish community headquartered in Warsaw, the Union of Jewish Communities of Poland, and the World Jewish Restitution Organization. So JDC was very involved and still is. I left there in 2015, then came to AZM, but JDC was very involved from the fall of the Iron Curtain with the whole issue of compensation for Holocaust survivors and Jewish property restitution, reclamation of property that had been looted from Jewish individuals and especially from Jewish communities during the period of the Shoah and during the communist period. And there was a lot of work to be done in Poland for obvious reasons that I'm sure your viewers and listeners know. There was a debate going on throughout Eastern Europe in all the different countries about how to arrange the property and the assets to help benefit the local Jewish community, to maintain the cemeteries that remained, to preserve buildings that have historic value, but also support the living Jewish community that's there, the people, and how to balance and not just in Poland, but all the countries of Eastern Europe, the Jewish community that is there now or was there, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and the Jewish diaspora, the survivors, the descendants of people from those countries who also felt a connection and a claim to benefit from whatever is restituted because their families, even if you live in Israel, Europe, Australia, South Africa, Canada, America, their families, descendants of that country helped build those buildings, are buried in the cemeteries, and there was a sort of a tension and how to strike the right balance. So what happened in most countries, there was a partnership, and it still exists in Poland today, between the local Jewish community and something called the World Jewish Restitution Organization, WJRO, ELAR in Hebrew, the Irgun Olami LaHashavat Rachush, that is an Israeli amuta that is an umbrella of about a dozen international Jewish organizations that works on representing world Jewry in property in Eastern Europe, much as the way the Claims Conference does with properties in Germany and Austria. And so JDC, having worked with the Jewish communities in those countries, played a role in helping facilitate that arrangement in different countries. And Poland, obviously, with the largest community, the most properties, the most towns, the biggest destruction, was a center player in that area. And so we started to work to set up what became FUDZ, I won't try to pronounce it in Polish, the Foundation for the Preservation of Jewish Heritage, which has reclaimed many properties, cemeteries, and done a lot of work on preservation of Jewish property. When we find there was a
communal property, let me just jump in
Jewish
for-
communal
for her.
property,
So
right?
I think it's
So-
important
so
because
there
people
were-
get very confused with that.
There were about 5,000 claims identified. The government had set up a period from 1997 to 2002 in which claims had to be submitted. Due to various reasons, the whole claims process got finished in the last year or two. Things always happen at the last moment, and by the deadline in 2002, over 5,000 claims had been submitted. Here we are almost 20 years later, and about half of them still remain unprocessed, which is just a shockingly slow
And they're
system
not
of
in
bureaucracy.
and the process and things are frozen. In other words, I know that nothing new
Right.
is really going
So
through the system. in Poland.
The process moves at a turtle's, or shouldn't say a snail, it's not kosher, pace, but it's been very slow, drawn out process with a lot of bureaucracy. There is no progress in Jewish private property restitution,
Right, which is what I wanted
reclaiming
to ask you about.
property of individuals. But that's how I first came to Poland to work with the Jewish community and made dozens of trips. Was coming at a point every couple of weeks. And the US State Department, the US government was very involved in helping to facilitate the arrangements with through the US Embassy and officials from Washington that would come in to facilitate this arrangement so we could get the Jewish property claims moving. And through that, I also got involved and interested in the issue of Jewish cemeteries, not just in Poland, but throughout all of Eastern Europe. And one thing and another led to me being on the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad and some other bodies that deal with the preservation of Jewish cemeteries. And I still sit today on the board of the FUDS, the Foundation for Preservation of Jewish Heritage in Poland. So because of COVID, I've missed a year or so of being in Poland. I always tell everyone I've been to Poland over 50 times, but never been to the Grand Canyon. So
there you go. Well, Poland is like Poland in some ways is the Jewish Grand Canyon, isn't it? A big void for seen in the Jewish world in that sense. Not obviously not the way that we see it, but we do understand the larger, the way it's viewed. Herbert, I wanted to ask you a little bit. You touched on something which is interesting, a very complicated subject, and not that I expect you to solve it. Although if anyone can, Herb, about Jewish private property. So they're really the property, the Nazis took communal property, so synagogues, and then things were nationalized, of course, depending on the country. So synagogues, schools, Maccabi, sports clubs, hospitals, orphanages, all of these Batei Midrash, study halls, all
mikvahs, rabbi houses, right?
All of these, right? So this is called community property. But private property, your grandfather, father, uncle, whoever family owned a mill or an apartment building or a house in the village or in the middle of Krakow or something. And this is something that every other country in Europe, to some degree, has put this to rest. So there is some kind of mechanism in every other country except Poland for dealing with private property. It doesn't mean that you can't get it back. It just means there's no specific mechanism for Jews, right? If my grandfather had a property, I just have to go into the normal Polish court system, which is an incredibly high burden of proof. So why is that the case that Poland, in your opinion, that Poland hasn't passed a private property law?
I mean, both of you are probably better experts on the Polish culture than me, but Poland, I mean, part of it is the sheer volume of property and the destruction of what happened. And it's not just, the issue of private property in Poland often gets played out in the media as a Jewish issue, but it's really not. I forget the numbers offhand, but the vast majority of property that was nationalized by the government was private property of non-Jews, of local Polish Catholics and other local Polish residents. Obviously, the issues are compounded for the Jewish victims who came back, who had their property really confiscated first during the Holocaust. Not to mention a whole other subject, which some countries have dealt with, which is heirless property of the Kedoshim, the almost 3 million Jews of Poland who left no heirs, and that property then went to the state, and there's not even any discussion about compensation for that. So Poland, I think, because of you can talk better, the the political situation, the volume of property, the impact it would have, has been very slow. There have been proposals up and down, but nothing has gone forward in any meaningful way. There are individuals who do manage to go to court and find some defect. When the county, the voivoda confiscated the property in 47, the clerk forgot to stamp page 11, and then you can go to court 50 years later and say, oh, the taking or the confiscation was invalid because they didn't, stamp it properly. They didn't file it in the right courthouse or things like that, and try to get some compensation for the property. Most people don't want to come and return to their property. They just want an acknowledgement that, these are assets that were looted, that belong to their family, were taken first by the Nazis and then nationalized by the government. So because of the size and the destruction of what happened in Poland, it's become a more complicated issue, and legacy of the period of martial law. So there have been some efforts in other countries, limited, never really full, but the struggle remains in Poland, though Poland did make some small and very slow progress on the issue of community property restitution.
Yeah, I feel like there was progress being made with previous government about the individual issue, about individual property, and these days it's such a political. It's a very, very complicated political topic here, this idea. And we, Rabbi Avi and I and Rabbi Shudrik and all of us who are here building Jewish life in Poland, it's complicated because on one hand, we want justice for people who's lost their property and from their families. But on the other side, it's like, these days it's our focus is on the living Jews of Poland, not so much on so from the justice point of view, of course, but, sometimes, there's justice, and then there's sort of what's helpful to the local community.
Right. And with all the efforts, sorry, Avi.
No, you go ahead. I just had a question for you.
I was going to say, with all the efforts also on preserving cemeteries and property and buildings, there's also balance. What are the historic buildings to be, preserved? We're, the Am Sefer, we're not the Am, Habinyan, we're the people of the book. And Jewish buildings have a historical value, and there's, halachic issues of what happens to a building and what it gets, used for later. Obviously, many community properties don't have any, status that, of halacha. But especially issues of Jewish cemeteries, I learned on, from the legendary Rabbi Chaskel Besser, before my first visit to Poland, there's no such a thing as a former Jewish cemetery. Any land that was a Jewish cemetery is in perpetuity a Jewish cemetery. It's a different concept that people have for different religions. They have a different understanding of what can be done with a burial ground later on. And there's a lot of people with connections to their family or ancestral cemetery. But I remember hearing from Rabbi Block in Ukraine. He said, I can always find a donor who wants to give for the Beis HaChaim, and the Beis HaChaim is a word for the another term for a cemetery. But for the Chaim, the living in my schools and in my programs, it's a lot harder. So it's as it's a challenge to raise money and keep things going for the living Jews, which is something the JCC is a model and done an amazing job. And that has to be balanced with also obviously preserving our heritage and sites. And in many towns, the cemetery or the building that's there, and I visited many of these small towns or former shtetls, no one even knows there were 700 years of Jewish life in that town, right, except for one old building or the cemetery, and that's the only thing to connect people to know their history. And the FUDs and others have done projects to bring memory back and not just talk about the physical property, but educate people about right, what was here before,
of course,
the Holocaust.
The great challenge for us in Poland is to right, balance the past versus the present right, and the future.
I was going to ask you that. I've been traveling for 7-8 years, and Jonathan for long been here, living here, but we're inevitably, when we meet Jews in North America, Australia, Israel, wherever we are, and we tell about what we're doing, and you have been 50 times in Poland, so you get the question as well. You're always going to run into one or a group of people who say, Poland, I would not go spend a dime there. I wouldn't, how dare, and it could go all the way to an extreme. And it's a really hard thing, especially if that person is older than 70 years old. I have to be very, very careful in how I respond, that I'm helping build Jewish life in a place like this. And I'm talking about volunteers who are amazing and they're not Jewish. How do you deal with that?
So I think I remember hearing from one of the Jewish community leaders on one of my first trips, or maybe my first trip, that, who said something to the effect in Warsaw, Hitler tried to exterminate every ounce of Jewish life, every remembrance of Jewish life in Poland, and he almost succeeded, and he destroyed it, to an unbelievable extent, but not totally. And the fact that we're here and that we are able to rebuild, and we're not going to rebuild what was, the 1,000+ communities and the life that existed 100 years ago in Poland. We can never recreate that. But the fact that we're here, that you're there, and Jonathan, Avi, and Rabbi Shudrik in Warsaw, and the community there, and other towns, showed that, the resilience of the Jewish people, showed that Hitler didn't totally succeed, that, the Jewish people were the ultimate, we were the victims, but the victors, in terms of that we're here, the Nazis are gone, and we're, maintaining the 1,000 years of plus of Jewish life in Poland, and, preserving, I tell people the importance of preserving the heritage, of teaching people about what existed in Poland before, and also not neglecting, in Israel, people talk about, you don't leave a soldier behind, you don't leave anyone behind. So we have Jewish communities, and, with people, living Jews, Poland and throughout all the Eastern European countries, how are we to abandon them and just say, we give up on you? Maybe those people, and we know many of them, learn more about their Yiddishkeit, their connection to Judaism. Their families were cut off for a generation, decades. So we're reclaiming Jewish lives. Those people go on to live in other countries, go to Israel. So how do we turn ourselves away? That's usually what I give, some version of that. I've heard that.
That's good.
The same thing from you, Avi, as you would get many, many times. I meet people at the airport who would, they come to Poland only to, it really bugs me, to see the cemeteries and visit the kvarim and the graves. And they would ask me, what am I doing? And I'd say, I was doing there's a Jewish community? I didn't even know that. Well, did you go to the synagogue? Yeah, I thought it was just a museum. And they don't even know or care or have any concept that there's a living Jewish community. So.
Herb, let's thank you for that. Yeah, no, we appreciate that, and I think we're all on the same page with that. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about your work today. For 4 years, you've been the CEO of the American Zionist Movement. Can you tell us briefly, and I want to get into some issues a little bit concerning the idea of Zionism in the U.S. and college campuses and where we're headed, and it's especially timely as we're of course facing the situation that we're facing with Israel, essentially at war, or technically at war, but fighting a difficult situation with Hamas. So maybe talk a little bit about what is the American Zionist Movement.
So AZM has been around different names for about 80 years as the umbrella body of Zionist groups in America across the spectrum, Orthodox, Reform, conservative movements, the labor Zionists, Hadassah, the women's groups. And there's now 35 of them. Anyone can learn all about it. I won't go through naming all of them at www.azm.org. We have been the convening body of Zionist groups since the period before the Shoah. So actually, there was always a Zionist movement in America. There were American Jews who went, as there were from Poland and many countries, to the first Zionist Congress in 1897 in Poland. While it had a huge, Haredi population, before the war had an extensive Zionist community, as is well known before the Shoah. So in America, there was a desire to pull together all the Zionist groups under one umbrella and begin a push for the state of Israel, especially with the UN and other diplomatic bodies being headquartered in New York throughout the later in the 1940s, and when the partition plan. So from the 30s to the 40s, there was the American Emergency Zionist Council, which became the American Zionist Council, changed its name to the American Zionist Federation, and the American Zionist Movement. So we're a movement of now 35 groups, very disparate, from Meretz on the left, groups that are affiliated with Likud, the ZOA, and other groups more on the right, the religious streams of the movements. The Orthodox community is both Mizrahi and now Eretz HaKodesh, which is more in the Haredi area of the community, and Dorshei Torah V'Tzion, which is more in the liberal part of the Orthodox community. So we have the women's groups, we have nonpartisan groups, we have groups that do advocacy, that do social services. We have 9 youth movements and organizations. So we're an umbrella body. We serve as a forum for the Zionist groups to share resources, to discuss common issues. And also we run the American elections for the World Zionist Congress, which is sort of the global parliament of the Jewish people. And through our organizations, we collectively represent the Americans in both the WZO and in their participation in the Jewish Agency, and the Americans who are in the Karen Kayemet KKL Jewish National Fund. So we've been a body that also promotes Zionism, tries to work with our organizations and in communities to highlight what we believe is the positive nature of Zionism. I grew up, and my father was a he talked about a Zionist household. His mother was a chapter president in the 1920s of Hadassah in Maine. He, went into the Haganah in 47 in Israel after graduating college. So people talked about being in a Zionist household. It was just part of what we were. It's a term that people don't really use. Zionism has become a word, maybe a legacy of the Zionism is racism effort of the UN, that over time, we collectively let our enemies of the state of Israel, the Jewish people, define Zionism, and there's a lot of work to be done to reclaim the term, to
how do we
help educate people.
I want to talk to you about that, because it's become, it was much more straightforward when we were kids, right? You raise money, you put it in the pushka. It was simple. These days, and I wanted to really touch on college campuses, that Israel is demonized in the United States, and it used to be the political, things have completely shifted, and we're seeing that in real time today with the left wing of the Democratic Party. Democratic Party, traditionally, a great friend of Israel, and you're seeing a huge change. And in some ways, I feel almost like we're plugging holes in in the dikes, in holes in the dam, right? And it seems that these days, if you were to wear a t-shirt, a pro-Israel t-shirt on the most, if not all, of the top 100 college campuses today in the US, you would probably open yourself up. There's a good chance you would open yourself up to ridicule, or even worse. It seems like the American attitude toward Israel is shifting. And part of that, there are organizations which would consider themselves Zionist, but I would think that wouldn't necessarily meet the criteria for being in the AZM, J Street, for example. In other words, the automatic, the given that we grew up with, saying, oh, you're Jewish, you support Israel, you can be critical, but you support Israel. That's not it's not a given anymore. So what do we do as an American society? The 3 of us here are Americans. What do we do about that? Is that fixable?
So obviously there are, and also, historically, as the American Jewish community have evolved, there are groups that didn't consider themselves Zionist historically, but many of them have embraced that term. There's a long history, obviously, in America of that, but there's many groups that deal now with the Israel advocacy, or don't even, from our perspective, don't even use the term Zionist, because it's become a negative term. So instead of being the national liberation movement that Herzl promoted, that continue, many people wonder, why is there even Zionism anymore? Wasn't it about founding the state of Israel? So, the World Zionist organizations, the institutions exist, but because Herzl's vision was not just to create the state of Israel, which happened in 48, but to build a state, the Chevra Mofet, to perfect the state, to make it an ideal and exemplary society, and also to connect world Jewry to Israel. Which is still a challenge that we have today. I'm not sure people ever anticipated in Basel in 1897 the percentage or half the world Jews would live in Israel, but there's still a large need to connect world Jewry, the diaspora, with Israel, and that's a message of Zionism. Zionism should be a positive movement that is viewed in that light by all peoples, and many understand it, but it's become demonized, as unfortunately as a racist term, a colonialist,
even among Jews,
etc. But
Jews.
among misunderstood or not known among Jews, and that's a part of a collective failure, I think, of at least in America, of lack of adequate Jewish education, not only day schools but in communities, and education on Israel and Zionism, and whatever there is limited and really too late. When you talk about college campuses, and I have kids who've gone to day school, so they got a lot of it, and they went to Zionist camps in Bnei Akiva camp, Mosheva. My oldest son's a lone soldier in the IDF. But for many, and I can know from what they hear from others, by the time you educate, work on college campuses, and someone shows up on campus and is bombarded with apartheid week or things like that in their freshman year when they're first getting settled in, and they don't have the tools and the knowledge and the background, to speak up or fight the battle, it's very difficult. So, obviously we have a struggle, we collectively, with the general population in America, with the issues of intersectionality, and how, there are many groups that have taken up the cause of the Palestinian population, and the Arab population and equated it with oppressed peoples, and the whole concept of intersectionality that is permeating on many campuses. Plus, internally within the Jewish community, the need to educate our own people. And obviously, we all collectively want the best ultimate peaceful solution that includes dignity and rights for the Arab Palestinian neighbors. That's something enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. But the whole situation has become complicated, and with the spread of social media and how things get spread much faster than the past. So we have really a two-front battle: one with the internally within our community, and one with the larger society.
I'm far more, I'm not sure, and I'd like to hear your opinion. I'm far more concerned with Jewish attitudes toward Zionism in Israel than I am about the rest of the world. I want everyone to appreciate the liberation movement ideology of Zionism, and to appreciate Israel for what it is, a flawed but generally, I think, a great country that adds a lot to the world. But I can live if the world is a little bit against us. I think, a house divided can't stand, I guess Lincoln, this is my fear, is that the average liberal U.S. Jew, Jew growing up, who comes from a standard background, probably that many of us came from, is not automatically going to be very pro-Israel. And if you extrapolate that 1 or 2 generations down the road, that's going to look at a fundamentally different landscape that we're already seeing. Now, if peace breaks out in the Middle East and things get fixed, maybe that'll change.
And you also have issues.
What do we do?
Right, and those issues are not just about the Palestinian conflict, or the territories, and within AZM we have groups that refer to it, the occupied territories, West Bank, and we have groups that say never use those terms, that's Judea and Samaria. So we have everything at our table, and we believe in it. We believe in a broad tent, but in our tent are groups that are Zionist, and only groups that are Zionist. But the challenges are not only around the Palestinian.
Zionist, according to you have certain red lines.
I mean, there's what was Herzl's platform. The Basel platform has evolved to become the Tochnit Yerushalayim, the Jerusalem program, which is the platform, and you can see it on our website, of the World Zionist Organization, and groups have to agree to that, and anyone has to agree to that as an individual member, and basic commitment to the the Jewish democratic homeland in Israel and a number of other categories. And if you don't agree with those basic principles, then you're not considered in the Zionist family, and we have groups. Again, there's a lot of different views, and many of them, are represented in the Knesset. We have Meretz USA, which is a party in the Knesset. There's a lot of different people to views them much more on the right. So we have a big range. But what I was going to say is also another issue, obviously, is connection of populations across the religious streams. The connection of people in the Orthodox community, which is not monolithic, is very different than many of the issues that relate to religious observance, to pluralism, to connection that affect connection between those who are in the Reform and Conservative movement to Israel. So complicating everything, with all the debates and dialogue in the public on the Arab, Israeli, and Palestinian conflict are internal issues in the Jewish community on where on the Kotel and conversions and weddings and all those things. So we're as Avi can probably give you all the sources, we're a difficult and stubborn and quarrelsome people that goes back, to the citations in the Tanakh. So some of that continues to this day.
I would say we're doing much better than the period of the monarchy. So right. We should at least acknowledge that.
Right.
There was a lot more civil war back then.
Right, but unfortunately, there's still too much today. And the Milchamot HaYudim, the internal struggles within the Jewish community, are something that's worrisome to all of us when we have all these external enemies that are really, as you see today and what's going on in Israel, that they're not discriminating when they're launching missiles from Gaza at this is a secular town, this is a Dati kibbutz, this is an Orthodox area. So Hitler did not discriminate on who they deported to the camps. If you put on tefillin every day or you ate pork on Yom Kippur. So it was there's things that need to bind us together, especially when we have greater challenges and challenges for Israel on the world scene. So I think collectively, there's a greater need for Israel education and Zionist education, beginning as early as possible across the spectrum. However, different people's ideologies and views of Israel, there's a certain commonality of Zionist principles that are important for our community.
Amen. I think Rabbi Ivan and I don't agree about much, but I think we'll both agree with you about that, Herb. But
we agree about most things, or some things.
I came onto the Zoom at the beginning, so I didn't hear the beginning. I'll have to go back and watch it.
I'll quickly say that I was saying that besides the rockets falling, I think for me the difficult aspect is seeing all these the internal strife going on in Israel. And I said, with Jews attacking Arabs and Arabs attacking Jews. And Rabbi Avi felt that that wasn't the case, that it's just Arabs attacking Jews, or if Jews are doing it, it's only as a response. That's what he meant. But I don't want to.
I won't get into the middle of that, but I can tell you. I mean, my son, who spoke last night as a lone soldier, SAR, to the school in Riverdale where he went.
Where Avi went.
And so I'll send you the clip. He talked about one of the lasting impacts of this situation now is going to be the internal issues in Israel. And when I was at JDC, there was a task force on Israeli Arab issues that working with to improve the conditions of social services, housing, education among Israel's Arab population. So some of the issues that have come or boiled over or ignited in the last 2 weeks will be part of the legacy that I think everyone acknowledges needs to be addressed and is troublesome.
Where's your son? Where's your son serving?
He serves in the Givati Brigade, combat infantry unit. His unit's based now in the Lebanon border. So he is, I was in Israel for his tekes when he graduated from basic training, and in November I managed to get in as a lone soldier parent with my family for that occasion, and then we went from there to my father's grave on the Mount of Olives, as my father had been in Machal, and my son's in Machal, the Chutz La'aretz, the volunteers from abroad who come, which is a really unique thing in to the extent in Israel of Jewish people from around the world who come to fight, then in 47, even today, to protect the homeland. So I do a different kind of fighting and didn't wear a uniform, but proud to be in the sandwich between two lochamim for the state of Israel, my son and my father.
Kol hakavod, wonderful. Herb, that's great. You're talking to Rabbi Avi, is the father of a Givati officer, and I was a lone soldier as well. So we're on Team Block.
Thank you. If I can add just one thing, just with AZM, and thank you to Jonathan for hosting, and we hope to be able to travel again. The AZM has hosted delegations of UN ambassadors of foreign countries to the UN. Over 66 countries have participated, with 100 ambassadors from on 4 different trips, where they went at the initiative of then Ambassador Danny Danon and now Ambassador Erdan, together with the AZM president Richard Heidemann, put together and the International March of the Living, put together an initiative to bring foreign diplomats both for a couple of days to Poland to learn about the Shoah and sometimes around the March of the Living, and then go on to Israel to see things firsthand. As the Ein Shmiya Dom El Ariya, you can't see things, can't understand things without seeing them firsthand in the same way. So it's important for people to see what happened in Poland. Obviously, that the creation of the state of Israel is not just a legacy of the Shoah, but to understand the background and to understand what's going on in Israel on the ground today. So thank you for having the JCC host the ambassadors, and we hope to be resuming that again as COVID eases things, and many things,
we're always
like this Zoom are great, but there are things that can't replace visiting in person.
Of course, no, we're always happy. We love the program. We're always excited to first of all to work in any sense with AZM. We love you guys, and happy, and it's an honor for us to be able to help fly the flag of the Jewish people, and to show not only, especially in a place like Poland, that it's not only death and destruction, there's also a rebirth possible. Herb, are you Team Latka or Team Hamantash?
Wait, I'm not sure. Is that a question? What's my favorite one?
Yes.
I'm a partisan to Mun Hamantash.
Oh,
no, I can eat a good number of latkes also and sufganiyot, but my sweet spot is the Mun Hamantash.
I like it. We get latke. And Herb, I always ask people your 3 favorite films.
Hey, I'm not a big film guy, so now you're going to get me. Should I name? I could go for some.
3 favorite.
My favorite commentary was Airplane, I guess. I would go with some baseball movies like
like Field of Dreams.
Field of Dreams, I was going to say, right? And either one of those.
Wait, are you Mets or Yankee fan?
Diehard Mets fan. So I bleed blue and orange also.
Ooh, I see basically pretty much. Listen, you have the Nachal and the Mets with the AZM logo.
And there's a lot of similarity with the Mets, and waiting for next year, and keep hope alive, keeping our hope alive for so there's a lot of Jewish connections there. In our values as it builds internal fortitude to be a Mets fan. But one of my father's levaya in 2002, I talked about one of our proudest moments was being, running out of right after Havdalah and Simchas Torah to get to Game 7 of the World Series in '86 and being there in the ballpark when they won. So that was a great that was a great moment. So yes, I am a Zionist Mets fan.
Zionist Mets fan. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Herbert Block, thank you so much. Our good friend.
Thank you.
Look forward
thank
to
you for inviting me
and to doing working with you in a lot of different ways. Thank you.
Appreciate it, and hope to see you soon again in Poland.
Hope your son stays safe and well, and thank you for defending Israel.
Thank you very much.
Be well, Herb.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.